No one expected Grandma Eleanor to ask for anything on her last birthday. For years, she had waved off gifts with a soft smile, saying she already had everything she needed. So, when she quietly told the family that this year she wanted everyone together, really together, it didn't seem strange at first. They thought she wanted company. What they didn't realize was that she wanted witnesses. The house filled slowly that afternoon. Children ran through familiar hallways, adults exchanged polite conversation, and the cake sat untouched on the table, its candles unlit. Eleanor sat in her chair near the window, wrapped in a light sweater, watching her family as if she were seeing them from a distance she had already crossed. She looked peaceful, but there was a weight in her eyes that no one knew how to name. Eleanor was turning 89. Doctors had been careful with their words, but the message was clear enough. Time was narrowing. Birthdays were no longer milestones to celebrate loudly. They were quiet acknowledgments of survival. Still, Eleanor had insisted on this gathering. Not next week. Not earlier. Today. When everyone finally settled, her eldest daughter leaned down and asked what she wanted before they cut the cake. Eleanor smiled, the kind of smile that carried memory and resolve. She said she had a gift for them instead. Laughter followed, gentle and dismissive. Grandma always joked like that. But Eleanor reached toward the side table and asked her grandson to bring her the small wrapped box waiting there. The box didn't look special. Plain paper. Not even. It was the kind of package no one paid attention to. Eleanor held it carefully, her hands steady despite their age. The room grew quiet, not because anyone expected something important, but because something in her posture asked for silence. She didn't open the box right away. Instead, she began to speak. She talked about birthdays long past, about the first one she remembered, and the last one she shared with her husband, about years that passed unnoticed and moments that mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Her voice was calm, but every word felt deliberate, chosen, placed exactly where it belonged. Then she said something that made the room shift. She said there were things a family could live with not knowing, and things that changed everything once they were spoken. She said she had carried one of those things for decades, believing silence was kindness. But silence, she had learned, could also be a kind of lie. No one interrupted her. Even the children sensed the gravity and went still. Eleanor placed the box on the table and told them it wasn't the gift itself that mattered, but what it represented. She said it held proof. Proof of a choice she made long ago. Proof of a truth that had shaped their lives without their permission. Her son tried to laugh it off, saying Grandma was being dramatic. Eleanor looked at him gently and said she hoped he would forgive her by the end of the night. That was when fear crept in. She finally opened the box. Inside was an envelope, yellowed with age, its edges worn as if it had been held too many times and never thrown away. Eleanor didn't take it out. She only touched it lightly and said the secret inside had waited long enough. Before anyone could ask what it was, Eleanor said she needed them to promise something first. She needed them to listen without anger, without denial, without trying to protect themselves from the truth. Because once the candles were blown out, there would be no taking it back. And this birthday would be remembered for reasons none of them were ready for. Eleanor let the silence stretch longer than anyone found comfortable, not out of cruelty, but because she understood the power of waiting. She had spent most of her life waiting for the right moment, the right courage, the right excuse to stay quiet, and now that time had finally run out. She lifted her eyes from the envelope and looked at each face around the room, lingering on some longer than others, as if memorizing them one last time. Then she began to speak again, her voice steady, unhurried, the kind of calm that comes only after a decision has already been made and cannot be undone. She told them that long before they existed, before marriages and children and shared holidays, there had been a summer when her life split quietly into a before and an after. She had been young then, younger than her eldest daughter was now, and certain that love alone could protect her from consequences. It was during that summer that she learned how wrong she was. She spoke of a man whose name she did not say, a man who had promised a future and vanished the moment it became complicated. What followed, she explained, was not dramatic or cinematic, but deeply ordinary and therefore more painful. Fear, isolation, decisions made in rooms with closed doors. She told them she had carried a child during that time, a child no one knew about, a truth that caused gasps, sharp breaths, hands covering mouths. Eleanor did not pause for their reactions. She had waited too long for permission already. She explained that in those days, there were fewer choices for women like her, and even fewer mercies. She had been told what would happen if she kept the baby, what would happen if she didn't, and what would happen if anyone ever found out. She chose what she believed would cause the least damage, not knowing that damage had a way of finding its own path no matter how carefully it was avoided. The child, she said, was born quietly and placed with another family under an agreement sealed by signatures and shame. The envelope on the table contained proof of that birth. Documents she had never destroyed, even when everyone told her to. She kept them not because she planned to reveal the truth, but because letting them go felt like erasing a life she had already failed once. As Eleanor spoke, memories rearranged themselves in the minds of her children, small moments that had never quite made sense before suddenly glowing with meaning. Her unusual protectiveness of one grandchild, her discomfort with certain conversations, the way she sometimes stared too long at strangers. None of it had been random. All of it had been grief disguised as normalcy. Eleanor admitted that she had watched from afar as that child grew up, careful never to cross the line that would expose them both. She had known when the child married, when they struggled, when they had children of their own. She had carried pride and pain in equal measure, loving from a distance because distance was the price of secrecy. When she finally stopped speaking, the room felt smaller, heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to hear what came next. Eleanor rested her hand on the envelope and said that secrets didn't stay buried forever. They waited. And this one, she said softly, had waited long enough. No one spoke at first, not because there was nothing to say, but because every thought collided with another, leaving no clear path forward. Eleanor watched their faces change as understanding began to take shape, confusion giving way to disbelief, disbelief hardening into something like shock. She knew this stage well. She had lived inside it for decades. Slowly, her son asked the question everyone was thinking but no one wanted to voice, asking where this child was now, asking what any of this had to do with them. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, not in pain, but in resolve, and said the child was closer than they realized, closer than anyone had ever been prepared to imagine. She explained that life had a cruel sense of symmetry, that the same paths people walk without noticing often lead them back to truths they were never meant to escape. She gestured gently toward the room, toward the people gathered there, and said that blood did not always announce itself loudly, that sometimes it lived quietly among them, woven into everyday life. The realization came slowly, painfully, as Eleanor revealed that the child she had given up was not a stranger living somewhere far away, but someone who had already stood at this table, laughed in this house, celebrated holidays without knowing why the connection felt deeper than it should. She spoke of how she had watched them grow from the shadows, how she had recognized herself in their gestures, their stubbornness, their kindness. One of her daughters began to shake her head, whispering no over and over, while another reached instinctively for someone beside her, suddenly afraid of what that meant. Eleanor confirmed what they were all beginning to fear, that one of her grandchildren was not, by blood, who they believed them to be, and yet by love, had always belonged. The room erupted then, not in shouting, but in fractured emotion, tears, questions overlapping, voices cracking under the weight of what had just been placed between them. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She let the storm move through them, understanding that truth often arrived like this, messy and unforgiving. She said she had never planned for it to be revealed this way, but time had made the choice for her. The documents in the envelope, she explained, connected the past to the present unmistakably, dates and names aligning in a way that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. She had feared this moment all her life. Feared losing the love of the family she had built by revealing the truth of the life she had once surrendered. Yet as she looked around the room now, she realized something else had always been at risk too, the right of every person there to know who they were. She told them she did not expect forgiveness, only honesty, and she asked them to remember that every choice she had made had been shaped by a world that gave her none that felt safe. As her words settled, the birthday cake sat forgotten, candles unlit, time itself seeming to pause as the family faced a truth that would redefine every memory they shared. The truth did not settle gently. It moved through the room like a living thing, forcing itself into every memory, every relationship, every assumption that had once felt solid. Eleanor watched as her family struggled to rearrange their understanding of one another, as glances lingered too long and familiar faces suddenly felt unfamiliar. The grandchild at the center of the revelation sat frozen, caught between identities, trying to reconcile a lifetime of belonging with the sudden knowledge that their origins were different than they had believed. Eleanor's heart ached at the sight, because this was the pain she had spent decades trying to prevent, and now it was unavoidable. She spoke again, her voice softer now, not to justify herself, but to offer context, to remind them that love had never been a lie even if history had been incomplete. She told them that family was not undone by truth, but tested by it, and that what they chose to do next would matter more than what had been hidden before. Slowly, reactions began to change. Anger gave way to grief. Grief softened into understanding, and understanding opened the door to compassion. Questions came more gently now, asked not as accusations, but as attempts to make sense of a past that had been reshaped. Eleanor answered what she could and admitted what she didn't know, refusing to fill gaps with comfort or false certainty. She reminded them that the person they loved had not changed, that the years of shared laughter, arguments, and care were real and could not be erased by paperwork or biology. One by one, family members moved closer, physically and emotionally, drawn together by the shared vulnerability of the moment. The grandchild whose life had been turned inside out finally spoke, not with anger, but with quiet confusion, asking Eleanor why she had waited so long. Eleanor reached for their hand, her touch steady despite her trembling heart, and said she had waited because she was afraid of losing them all, and because sometimes survival demanded silence even when it cost peace. Tears flowed freely then, not as a release of pain alone, but as a recognition of the courage it had taken to carry such a secret for so long. As the evening wore on, the cake was finally cut, the candles lit late, their flames flickering in a room forever changed. Wishes were made in silence, each person carrying a different hope for healing, for clarity, for the strength to move forward together. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, exhausted but lighter, knowing that whatever came next would be built on truth rather than fear. This birthday would not be remembered for the gifts or the cake, but for the moment a family chose to face reality together, discovering that love, when honest, could survive even the most shattering revelations.